Jacob Mercer woke to the sound of his trading post surrounded by what he estimated to be at least 40 Mohican warriors, their painted faces visible through the gaps in his shuttered windows as dawn broke over the frozen Hudson River Valley. His first thought was that he was about to die. His second was that he probably deserved it. And his third was a desperate hope that the baby sleeping in his last blanket near the fire would somehow survive whatever judgment was coming. 12 hours ago, Jacob had been a cautious fur trader who minded his own business and avoided conflicts between colonial powers and indigenous nations fighting over this contested land. Then he had found a freezing infant on his doorstep and made a choice that compassion demanded but survival instincts screamed against. Now, as he heard the distinctive sound of dozens of warriors taking position around his post, Jacob understood that his comfortable neutrality had just died along with any illusion that a man could live in this valley without eventually having to choose what kind of person he wanted to be. If you're moved by stories about impossible choices, the bonds that transcend cultural divides, and the moments that define our humanity, subscribe now because this journey will challenge everything you believe about family and belonging. The previous night had been brutally cold, the kind of winter evening in the Hudson Valley that killed the unprepared and tested even the experienced. Jacob had been preparing to close his trading post of the night, banking the fire and securing the heavy shutters against the wind, when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it, a tiny cry barely audible over the howling wind. He had opened his door to investigate and found a bundle of rags on his doorstep, and inside those rags, a baby. The infant couldn't have been more than a few months old, with the distinctive features of the Mohican people, but skin slightly lighter than usual, suggesting mixed heritage. The child was nearly frozen, lips blue, body barely moving. Jacob had stood there for perhaps 3 seconds, his mind racing through implications and dangers. Before his body made the decision, his brain was still calculating. He scooped up the baby and brought it inside. His trading post was modest, a single large room, a loft for sleeping, shelves lined with goods for trade, and a massive stone fireplace that served as the heart of the space. Jacob laid the baby near the fire and began the desperate work of warming a nearly frozen child without shocking its small system. He had learned basic frontier medicine during his 15 years in the valley, enough to know that warming had to be gradual, careful. The baby was wrapped in rags that were completely inadequate for the weather. Jacob looked at his own blanket, the thick wool one that he slept under every night, his only real protection against the killing cold. He looked at the baby, at the small chest barely rising and falling. Then he wrapped the child in his blanket and spent the next hour rubbing warmth back into tiny limbs, dripping warm water into the small mouth, praying to God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. Around midnight, the baby's color had improved and the breathing had steadied. Jacob prepared a makeshift formula from goat's milk and honey, having no idea if it was appropriate for an infant, but knowing the child needed nourishment. To his relief, the baby drank eagerly, small hands gripping his finger with surprising strength. Jacob was 42 years old, had never married, had no children of his own. He had come to Hudson Valley as a young man seeking fortune in the fur trade, had learned to speak passable Mohican and adequate Dutch, and had built a reputation as a fair trader who dealt honestly with all parties. His trading post sat on land that was technically disputed territory, claimed by both the British colonial government and the Mohican Confederacy, which made it useful neutral ground for commerce. Jacob had carefully maintained that neutrality for 15 years, never taking sides, never getting involved in the larger conflicts consuming the valley. But as he sat through that long, cold night, keeping the baby warm, feeding it every few hours, listening to its small, contented sounds, Jacob felt something shift inside him. This child had been abandoned, left on his doorstep because someone knew or hoped that a trader might have more resources or compassion than whatever situation had forced him to give up the baby. Whether that someone was Mohican or white, whether they intended to return or hoped Jacob would raise the child, he didn't know. All he knew was that this tiny, helpless human was alive because of his choice, and that created a responsibility he couldn't simply walk away from. As dawn approached and Jacob finally allowed himself to doze in his chair, still holding the sleeping baby, he had no idea that the child's family was already approaching. He had no idea that this infant's existence was a result of forbidden romance that had caused scandal in both communities. And he had no idea that his simple act of compassion was about to force him into the center of conflicts he had spent 15 years avoiding. The pounding on his door was what fully woke Jacob. He jerked upright in his chair, momentarily disoriented. The baby still sleeping peacefully in his arms wrapped in his blanket. Through the window, he could see warriors positioned all around his trading post, and standing directly at his door was a Mohican woman perhaps in her mid-20s, her face a mixture of desperate hope and terror. Beside her stood an older man, clearly a leader by his bearing and the deference the other warriors showed him. Jacob stood slowly, acutely aware that any sudden movement could be interpreted as hostile. He walked to the door, the baby still in his arms, and opened it carefully. The cold air rushed in, and he instinctively pulled the blanket tighter around the infant. The young woman's eyes immediately found the baby, and a sob escaped her throat. She spoke rapidly in Mohican, words tumbling over each other. Jacob caught fragments, something about her child, about searching all night, about fear and gratitude. She reached for the baby with trembling hands. Jacob looked at the older man, who he now recognized as Medicum, a respected sachem of the local Mohican clan. The sachem's face was stern, unreadable. He spoke in measured Mohican, which Jacob understood well enough after years of trading. "This child is my daughter's son," Medicum said. "She is unmarried. The baby's father is white, a British soldier who promised marriage and then abandoned her when he learned she carried his child. My daughter was shamed, cast out by some in our community who saw the child as a symbol of betrayal. Last night, in desperation and cold, she left the baby here, hoping you would show more mercy than her own people had shown her." Jacob felt the weight of this revelation. The baby wasn't just a child in need. It was a symbol of forbidden love, of cultural collision, of the impossible position that people of mixed heritage occupied in this divided land. He looked at the young mother, saw the shame and anguish in her face, and made another decision that went against all frontier pragmatism. "She can come inside," Jacob said. "Both of you. We should talk where it's warm, not standing in the cold." Medicum's eyes widened slightly, surprised by the invitation. He spoke to his daughter in rapid Mohican, then turned back to Jacob. "My warriors will remain outside," he said. "But yes, we will come in." Inside the trading post, Jacob carefully placed the baby in the young mother's arms. She collapsed into sobs of relief, holding her child close, whispering words of love and apology. Medicum stood stiffly, watching his daughter with an expression that mixed disappointment and protective love. Jacob prepared tea, a simple hospitality that gave everyone a moment to collect themselves. When he finally sat across from Medicum, the sachem spoke first. "You saved my grandson's life," he said. "For that, I owe you a debt, but I must know your intentions. Will you tell the British authorities about this child? Will you spread word that my daughter bore a child out of wedlock with a white soldier?" Jacob considered his response carefully. "I am a traitor," he said. "My business depends on trust and discretion. What happens in families is not my concern to spread. I found a freezing baby on my doorstep, and I kept it alive through the night. That is all anyone needs to know." The young woman, still holding her baby, spoke for the first time in halting English. "Thank you," she said. "I am called Kimmy. I thought my baby would die. I thought I had no choice but to leave him with you and disappear into the forest to die myself. But you saved him. You gave him your blanket, even though you needed it yourself." Jacob gestured to the warm fire. "I have the fire," he said. "The baby had nothing. It was a simple choice." "It was not simple," Medicum said firmly. "Many white traders would have left the child outside, would have claimed they never heard the cries, would have avoided the complications that helping brings. You chose differently. That speaks to your character." Over the next hour, the full story emerged. Kimmy had fallen in love with a British soldier stationed at the colonial outpost 20 miles downriver. He had courted her in secret, promised to marry her and take her to Boston, where, he claimed, no one would care about her heritage. When she became pregnant, he had instead been reassigned to another post and left without a word. Kimmy had tried to hide her pregnancy, but eventually it became obvious. Some in her clan had been understanding, but others had been harsh, seeing the child as a symbol of weakness and betrayal. When the baby was born 2 months ago, Kimmy had tried to care for him alone, living in a small shelter away from a main village. But winter had made survival nearly impossible, with no food, no proper shelter, and facing the possibility that both she and her son would freeze. She had made the desperate decision to bring him to Jacob's trading post, the only place she knew that might offer help without judgment. "What will you do now?" Jacob asked Kimmy gently. She looked at her father with uncertainty. Medicum sighed heavily. "She can return to our village," he said. "I have spoken with the council. The child is innocent of the circumstances of his birth. He is Mohican by blood, regardless of his father's heritage. We will accept him, though it will not be easy." "And Kimmy," Jacob asked, "will she be accepted as well?" Medicum's expression hardened. "That depends on her willingness to live according to our ways, to accept the consequences of her choices, to raise her son to know his people and their traditions." Jacob saw pain flash across Kimmy's face. She loved this child fiercely, that was obvious. But he could also see that returning to her clan meant accepting shame, judgment, a diminished position in her community. The cost of survival was high. "There is another option," Jacob heard himself say, surprising even himself. "She could stay here." Both Medicum and Kimmy stared at him in shock. "Stay here," Medicum repeated. Jacob realized what he had just offered and felt his heart racing, but he pressed forward with the idea forming in his mind. "My trading post is neutral ground," he said carefully. "I deal with Dutch, British, and Mohican traders equally. Kimmy could work here, help with the trading, translate, earn her keep. The baby would be safe, warm, fed, and she would not have to endure the judgment of those who see her son as a mistake rather than an innocent child." Medicum's face was unreadable. "You had taken an unmarried Mohican woman with a child of mixed blood," he said slowly. "Do you understand what the British colonists would say about such an arrangement? What they would assume about your relationship?" "I stopped caring what people assumed about me years ago," Jacob replied. "I care about what is right. That child nearly died last night because there was nowhere safe for him to exist. If I can provide that safety, then that is what I will do." Kimmy looked between her father and Jacob, hope dawning in her eyes but tempered by uncertainty. "I would work hard," she said quietly. "I know furs, know how to prepare pelts, know the language of trade. I would not be a burden." Medicum stood and walked to the window, looking out at his warriors waiting in the cold. When he turned back, his expression was grave. "If my daughter stays here, some of my clan will see it as further betrayal, as choosing the white world over her own people. And the British will see it as exactly what you say they will see, a native woman living with a white trader. Both of you will face condemnation." "Perhaps," Jacob acknowledged, "but condemnation from people who value judgment over compassion is not something I fear." The sachem studied Jacob for a long moment. "You are an unusual man, Jacob Mercer," he said finally. "Most white traders I know think only of profit, of advantage, of survival. You seem to think of something else." "I think of what kind of man I want to be when I look back on my life," Jacob said simply. "I would rather be someone who helped when he could than someone who turned away because it was easier." Medicum nodded slowly. "Then I will allow this," he said. "My daughter may stay here if she chooses. But understand this, the child is still Mohican. He must be raised knowing his people, knowing their ways and language. You will not try to make him white." "I would not know how to raise a child at all," Jacob admitted. "If Kimmy stays, the child will be raised by his mother according to her traditions. I am only offering shelter and safety, nothing more." Kimmy spoke up, her voice stronger now. "I choose to stay," she said, "for my son's sake. He deserves a chance at life without shame, without being seen as a problem to be solved." She looked at Jacob with gratitude. "Thank you for offering this. I will prove myself worthy of your kindness." After Medicum and the warriors departed, Jacob and Kimmy stood in awkward silence. The baby had fallen asleep again, content and warm. The reality of what Jacob had just committed to was settling over him like a heavy blanket. "I should explain how the trading post works," Jacob said finally, falling back on practical matters. "The main trading season is spring through fall. Trappers and hunters bring furs. I trade goods and supplies. Winter is quieter, mostly maintaining inventory, and preparing for spring. There's a small room in the back, currently used for storage. We can clear it out, make it into living quarters for you and your son. Over the following days, they established a routine. Jacob cleared the back room, building a small partition for privacy. Kimmy proved to be remarkably capable, organizing the trading post with an efficiency that impressed Jacob. She knew furs better than he did, could identify quality pelts at a glance, and had a gift for negotiation that served them well when trappers came to trade. The baby, whom Kimmy had named the Scoop, meaning snake in Mohican, a name that represented transformation and adaptability, thrived in the warm trading post. Jacob found himself fascinated by the infant, by how much personality could exist in such a small being. When Kimmy worked, Jacob often found himself holding a Skook, talking to him in a mixture of English and broken Mohican, watching the baby's eyes track movement and light. Word spread quickly through the valley about the arrangement at Jacob's trading post. The reactions were exactly as predicted. British traders began avoiding the post, spreading rumors about Jacob's improper relationship with a savage woman. Dutch settlers were more pragmatic, caring less about scandal than about fair prices on furs. And the Mohican response was mixed, with some praising Medicum's wisdom in finding a safe place for his grandson, while others saw Kimmy's choice as a final rejection of her people. One particularly difficult day came when a British colonial officer named Lieutenant Hartwell arrived at the trading post with 2 soldiers. Jacob recognized him immediately as trouble. Hartwell was known for his harsh treatment of indigenous peoples and his rigid adherence to colonial racial hierarchies. "Mercer," Hartwell said without preamble, "you are harboring a native woman in your establishment. There are laws about such arrangements, laws designed to maintain proper order and prevent miscegenation." "She works here," Jacob replied calmly. "I employ her as a translator and fur specialist. There is no law against employing capable workers. There are laws about morality," Hartwell said coldly, "about maintaining the separation that God and nature intended between civilized people and savages." Jacob felt anger rising, but kept his voice level. "If you have come to trade, Lieutenant, I will do business with you. If you have come to insult my employee, then I suggest you leave." Hartwell's face reddened. "You forget yourself, Mercer. I could report you to the colonial authorities, have your trading license revoked. You could try," Jacob agreed, "but I maintain relationships with Dutch, British, and Mohican traders. Revoking my license would upset all 3 groups and disrupt commerce throughout the valley. I suspect your superiors would not appreciate that." After Hartwell left, making vague threats about future consequences, Kimmy emerged from the back room where she had been listening. "I am causing you trouble," she said quietly. "Perhaps it would be better if I left." Jacob turned to face her. "If you left, where would you go?" "Back to a village where some see your son as shameful. Into the wilderness to try surviving alone with an infant. Those are not real choices, Kimmy." She met his eyes. "Then why are you doing this?" "Truly, not the noble words you told my father, but the real reason." Jacob was quiet for a moment, searching for honesty. "Because 15 years ago," he said slowly, "I came to this valley full of ideals about making my fortune and living free. And somewhere along the way, I became exactly what I never wanted to be. A man who kept his head down, who avoided complications, who cared more about profit than people. When I found your son freezing on my doorstep, it was the first time in years I felt like I had a chance to be better than what I had become." As winter gradually released its grip on the Hudson Valley and spring approached, the trading post transformed into something Jacob had never experienced: a home. Kimmy's presence brought life to the space in ways he hadn't anticipated. She sang to a Skook in Mohican while she worked, teaching Jacob the words and their meanings. She cooked traditional foods that filled the post with unfamiliar but wonderful aromas. And slowly, carefully, she began to smile more, the weight of shame and fear lifting, as she realized that here, at least, she and her son were truly safe. Jacob found himself looking forward to evenings by the fire, when the day's work was done and they would talk. Kimmy told him about Mohican customs and beliefs, about the complex political landscape of the Confederacy, about her childhood before everything had become complicated. Jacob shared stories about his own past, about growing up in Pennsylvania, about the dreams that had brought him to the frontier, about the loneliness he had grown so accustomed to that he had stopped noticing it until it was gone. A Skook grew rapidly, his mixed heritage becoming more apparent. He had his mother's dark eyes and hair, but his skin tone was lighter than most Mohican children, and his features showed the blending of two worlds. Jacob worried about what that would mean for the boy as he grew older, about the rejection he might face from both cultures. But Kimmy seemed determined to raise him with pride in all aspects of his heritage. One evening in early spring, as they sat by the fire with Skook sleeping peacefully in a cradle Jacob had built, Kimmy spoke about something that had clearly been on her mind. The British soldier who fathered a Skook. She said quietly, his name was William Hartwell. Jacob felt shock ripple through him. Lieutenant Hartwell, he said, the one who came here threatening us. Kimmy nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. He was different when we met, or perhaps I was foolish enough to believe he was different. He spoke of love, of a future together. I believed him because I wanted to believe someone could see past what I was born as and see me as simply a person. When I told him I was carrying his child, he looked at me with such disgust, said he could never acknowledge a savage's bastard, that I had been a diversion, but nothing more. Jacob felt fury building in his chest. He has a son, he said, a living child, and he denies him, threatens the mother, treats both of you as less than human. That is the way of many white men, Kimmy said bitterly. They want indigenous women for pleasure, but not for family, for temporary comfort, but not for permanent commitment. I was naive to think otherwise. Not all white men, Jacob said quietly. Kimmy looked at him, something shifting in her expression. No, she agreed. Not all. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken feelings that had been growing for months. Jacob was acutely aware of how much his life had changed since finding a Skook on his doorstep. This woman and child had become the center of his world in ways he was only beginning to understand. Before either could speak further, the sound of horses approaching broke the moment. Jacob stood quickly, moving to the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. Lieutenant Hartwell had returned, but this time with a full squad of soldiers, perhaps 20 men, all armed. Jacob turned to Kimmy. Take a Skook and go to the back room, he said urgently. Do not come out no matter what you hear. Kimmy's face went pale, but she nodded, scooping up her sleeping son and disappearing into the back. Jacob checked that his rifle was loaded and positioned himself near the door. When the pounding came, he opened it calmly, blocking the entrance with his body. Lieutenant Hartwell stood at the front of his men, his face twisted with something that looked like vindication. Jacob Mercer, he announced loudly, I am here on official colonial business. You are accused of harboring a fugitive and engaging in immoral congress with a native woman. You will surrender her to my custody immediately. She is not a fugitive, Jacob replied evenly. She is my employee and under my protection. And there is nothing immoral about our arrangement. That is not for you to decide, Hartwell said. Step aside or be arrested for obstruction. Jacob felt his hand tighten on his rifle. You are not taking her, he said. Then you are a traitor to your own people, Hartwell snarled. Choosing a savage over civilization. I am choosing decency over tyranny, Jacob replied. Now leave my property. What happened next occurred in seconds, but felt like hours. Hartwell gestured to his men to advance. Jacob raised his rifle, and then, emerging from the forest surrounding the trading post, came Mohican warriors. Not 40 this time, but what looked like over 100, led by Medicum and accompanied by several other sachems Jacob recognized from various clans. Medicum walked forward until he stood between Jacob and the British soldiers. He spoke in clear English so everyone would understand. This trading post is on disputed land, he said. Land that my people have legitimate claim to. The woman you seek is under protection of both Jacob Mercer and the Mohican Confederacy. If you attempt to take her by force, you will have to fight through all of us. Hartwell looked at the overwhelming force arrayed against him, and Jacob saw a calculation in his eyes. This is an act of war, the lieutenant said. No, Medicum replied calmly. This is an act of protecting our people from injustice. You come here with soldiers to seize a woman who has committed no crime, whose only offense is existing where you do not want her to exist. That is the act of aggression, Lieutenant, not our response to it. The standoff lasted several tense minutes. Finally, Hartwell made the smart choice. He ordered his men to withdraw, but not before delivering a final threat. "This is not over," he said to Jacob. "You have made yourself an enemy of the colonial government." After the soldiers departed, Medicum approached Jacob. "You were willing to fight for my daughter," he observed. "She and her son are under my protection," Jacob replied. "I meant what I said." The sachem nodded slowly. "My daughter has told me that you treat her with respect, that you ask nothing improper of her, that you care for my grandson as if he were your own kin. These are the actions of an honorable man." He paused. "There is a Mohican custom. When a man proves himself worthy through his actions, when he shows he values our people and our ways, he can be adopted into the clan. Would you accept such an honor?" Jacob felt the weight of what was being offered. It would mean formally choosing a side in the conflicts consuming the valley, abandoning any pretense of neutrality. But looking at Kimmy standing in the doorway holding a skook at the community of Mohican people who had just risked confrontation to protect them, Jacob realized his choice had already been made months ago. "I would be honored," he said. The adoption ceremony took place 3 days later at the main Mohican village. It was a profound experience, full of ritual and meaning that Jacob only partially understood, but deeply felt. He was given a Mohican name, Weequashcook, meaning man of good heart. He was welcomed into Medicum's clan with full rights and responsibilities. And most significantly, he was formally recognized as part of Kimmy and Askook's family. After the ceremony, as they traveled back to the trading post, Kimmy rode beside Jacob. "You gave up your neutrality," she observed, "your relationship with British traders, your comfortable position between worlds." "I gained something more valuable," Jacob replied. "A family, a community, a sense of belonging I never had before." Kimmy smiled, and it transformed her face. "I have been thinking," she said quietly, "about Askook's future, about what it means to raise a child between two worlds. He will need a strong man to teach him, to show him how to navigate both his heritages with honor. He has you," Jacob said. "You are the strongest person I know. He also has you," Kimmy said, meeting his eyes, "if you are willing." Jacob understood what she was asking, what she was offering. Not just continued shelter, but partnership, family in the truest sense. "I am willing," he said, "for as long as you will have me." Years later, when Askook was old enough to understand, Jacob told him the story of the frozen night, when a baby appeared on a doorstep and changed everything. He told him about the choice between easy survival and difficult honor, about the communities that formed when people chose compassion over division, about the family that grew from a simple act of kindness on the coldest night of winter. The trading post continued to operate as neutral ground, though now clearly allied with Mohican interests. Jacob and Kimmy eventually married in both Mohican and Christian ceremonies. Their union a symbol of the possibility of bridging worlds that seemed impossibly divided. Askook grew up speaking English and Mohican, learning both for trading and traditional hunting, belonging fully to both heritages despite those who said such belonging was impossible. And Jacob Mercer, the solitary trader who had spent 15 years avoiding commitment and complication, discovered that the greatest fortune he could have found in the Hudson Valley was not measured in pelts or profit, but in the love of a brave woman, the trust of a resilient community, and the privilege of raising a child who represented the hope that maybe, just maybe, the future could be better than the divided present. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to remember that family is built through choice and love, not just blood. That the most important decisions we make are often the ones that cost us our comfortable neutrality. Leave a comment about the moment that resonated most deeply with you. Your support allows me to continue sharing these stories about the courage to choose compassion over convenience, about the communities that form when we see shared humanity instead of divisions, and about the truth that sometimes our greatest purpose finds us in the form of a freezing child on a winter night. Thank you for being here. And remember that we all face moments when we must choose between the safety of indifference and the risk of caring. May we all have the courage to give our last blanket when someone needs it more. Until next time, stay compassionate, stay brave, and never underestimate the power of one act of kindness to change not just one life, but the course of generations.